Hello and welcome to Executive Mosaic's video interview series. I'm Summer Myatt, and here to speak with me today is Stuart Wagner, Chief Digital Transformation Officer for the Department of the Air Force. Stuart, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So the Air Force's BRAVO Hackathon is an innovation event series that you launched late last year, and its first event in January focused largely on using open source code to build data-driven kill chains. The next hackathon, Canary Release, is scheduled to happen this summer. What will the second hackathon focus on?
Sure. The second hackathon is focused on basically two things. Number one, what we're trying to do is run a hackathon across multiple bases and multiple classifications simultaneously. And number two, we're adding a new set of use cases to the hackathon series. So our first series was focused on air combat use cases. We're now introducing space to our hackathons.
And what did you learn from the first hackathon? How will Canary Release be different, and what new outcomes are you hoping to see in July?
Sure. In the first hackathon, we basically learned two things. First, when organizing the hackathon, we requested data from multiple locations and venues. We found that the primary way that data was delivered to us was via United States Postal Service. That was the default way to deliver data. We found that pretty interesting. I actually studied computer science in school and took a network security class, and nowhere in the network stack is the United States Postal Service. That's not how data is supposed to be transferred. So we're physically transferring data, and that has some interesting implications on the way we're going to be able to build kill chains. So, and potential implications on the need to invest into enterprise IT. The second thing we learned was really something we validated, which was our belief at the time that by allowing people to bring in data and then bring in open source software rapidly, provide them the flexibility to build whatever they wanted with that data and give them a week to do so and bring in senior leaders to motivate them. We believed that would result in some incredible capability by removing the cybersecurity shackles on the data and allowing people to basically just build. We believed something great would come of it, and we verified that was actually the case. In fact, one of our capabilities is now that was developed at that hackathon. Just 3 months later, became operational in Europe and with the Air Force. And so we've since learned and validated that this approach works, and we're excited to see kind of how that can apply to the next hackathon. So for the next one, we're trying to go bigger. Bigger means scale to multiple bases simultaneously, operate at multiple classifications simultaneously, add on new use cases simultaneously. And if we're successful in our next hackathon, we will have validated a capability to rapidly develop on operational data and produce emergent capabilities for weapon systems at multiple locations, at multiple classifications, and demonstrate a new way to collaborate with multi-class data. And so that's what we're trying to do next.
And Stuart, I want to talk about the security aspect of this. A major aspect of this series is that you're not requiring a security clearance. You're encouraging industry, academia, and even just American citizens to apply and participate. Yes. Does this pose a security risk to the Air Force?
The development of any capability often or almost always would entail the involvement of human beings. And every additional human being involved in the development of a capability introduces additional risk. There is no riskless decisions at the Department of Defense. Each investment has an opportunity cost assigned to it. Each investment of time or of sharing data has a risk attached to it. We, the organizers of the Hackathon series, myself, Dr. Rev Jones, and myself in SAF-CN, CIO's office, Dr. Rev Jones from SAF-AQL, the Space Force, and Air Combat Command in the Department of the Air Force, believe it is an appropriate risk to allow American citizens that are vetted and bring a unique capability that is likely to provide basically a contribution to our event, the privilege and opportunity to participate in it at the unclass level. Uniquely, our event is offered at the unclass level all the way up to a form of compartmentalized information. And so we're going to some of the highest levels of classification at the Department of Defense, all the way down to unclass. And we're trying to collaborate together. And the reason we've decided and assessed that the risk is appropriate for the award, for the reward of doing so, is because fundamentally that is how we will fight. We will need to fight across and build capability in the event of a conflict on the data and in the locations that exist within the Air Force. And there are unclass locations in the Air Force, there are secret locations in the Air Force, and then there's other stuff that's more classified. And in order to collaborate and build, we must do that across those classifications. And in addition to that, in the event we need to bring in fresh eyes or new ideas, we need to rapidly do that with personnel who may be uncleared, and then therefore provide them access only to uncleared data. So we've decided to take that risk, and we think that the reward will be worth it.
So what's the application process like, and what are you looking for in an applicant?
Sure. So the best place to go, the Air Force website has a news release online that actually provides those opportunities. There are basically four ways to apply. The first way is for DoD employees and contractors with a CAC card to apply, and that link is the first link in that article. The second way to apply is for federal employees without a CAC card or DoD contractors without a CAC card to apply through another website, a Google form listed through AFWorks. The third way is through CyberWorks, which allows industry, academia, and American citizens to directly apply through that partnership intermediary agreement. And you can hold a clearance, or if you don't hold a clearance, that is a way you can apply. And then finally, the fourth application is an application to view the projects at our what we call a science fair. And that application is available to federal employees and DoD contractors only.
So Stuart, you built the hackathon series around this idea of being constructively disruptive to the Air Force and kind of forcing the service to embrace much needed change. Can you talk about the cultural implications you hope the hackathon will have on the Air Force, and what changes do you hope will be sparked from this?
Sure. So I'll tell a story about this, because that's where our constructive disagreements perhaps started. So ACC holds a conference each year called WebTech, and WebTech is basically where a lot of the premier Air Force weapons officers gather together and talk about the future requirements of the force. They operate at various levels of classification, and they basically discuss the future and what they need to build to do it. Our belief was that, while that was very constructive, that there's a lot of talking that takes place at the Department of Defense about what we need in the future, and there's probably not enough opportunities to just go build. And so what we did is we put on an event effectively across the street from that conference to go build stuff. That was interesting, is what I would say about that. ACC wasn't really sure what to make of it. They weren't really sure what to make of us. And they were skeptical that we would succeed. Since that time, we've gained some support within ACC, and we have basically turn them. We've turned parts of ACC to support and embrace this idea of data-driven warfare, of building data-driven kill chains at integration events where we rapidly deliver capability with input from warfighters. And the consequences of that are transformational. What that means is now we have a direct channel in line, we being CIO, software developers, software factories, directly to warfighters to start to kind of help shift them towards a digital future. And concurrently, they also now have that channel to us. And every time we hold an event, there's all the serendipity that takes place where human beings meet human beings. We're not just breaking through data or software problems. This is a human problem. And the human problem is collaboration. So by holding events like this, we've been able to improve the way technologists and warfighters collaborate to build stuff for the DoD. And so that's exciting. I like kind of being part of that, and I like seeing that. And so long term, we'd like to scale that to all of the Department of Defense. And the approaches we're applying are really popular in industry. It's really common to hold innovation events in industry. It's really common to be incentivized to collaborate and to build stuff that scales. And so that's what we're trying to do at the Department of Defense, except we're trying to do it with weapons systems.
You've said the Air Force's data story is broken. How can it be fixed, and what role does the hackathon play in that?
Sure. The data story is broken because of what I would diagnose as three causes. The first is the lack or the limited availability of automatically collected data in industry that's often called telemetry data. And without this data, we're unable to build the data-driven capabilities that are described in the Joint Warfare Concept, JADC2, ABMS, what have you. All of these Internet of Things, mesh network weapon system visions aren't possible without the data. So number one, we have to get that data. It can often be owned by contractors. We need ownership rights of that data so that we can leverage it for the enterprise. The second problem is the inability to develop easily with data. Oftentimes this data is locked in ATO'd authority to operate environments. These are production environments in the Department of Defense with strict cybersecurity protocols. And if I want to develop software in those environments, oftentimes I must develop it outside of that environment, which means I'm developing without the data. And if I'm developing without the data, my capability is going to be worse, and it's going to be slower to develop. Further, when I push that software to prod to see it run on that data, that's like development and prod. That's not how industry does it. It's not how academia does it. It's not really how anybody does it other than DoD, to my knowledge. So that's the second problem with our data story. And then the third problem is that we silo, hoard, and sap our data, or compartmentalize our data. Why three words? So silo refers to basically a cultural phenomenon in which organizations are not incentivized to share. Hoard is a power problem. Some programs specifically continue to receive funding because they don't share their data. They continue to exist only because they won't share. That's a problem. The third problem is we sap and compartmentalize. SAP is special access programs, and then compartmentalization frequently exists in like the TS spaces, top secret spaces of classification. But fundamentally, classification is institutionalized policy that says we're not allowed to share data with other people unless they have a need to know. And that need to know, the definition of need to know is actually pretty vague. That problem results in basically massive protections to data owners from needing to share their data with others. And that's a problem because If I don't share data, then I cannot effectively build. Then I cannot enable the enterprise to effectively build data-driven capabilities. So there's this dichotomy. On the one hand, senior leaders are saying, build data-driven capabilities that scale to the enterprise and provide competitive advantage. On the other hand, I'm not able to very easily obtain that data, fuse and aggregate that data. It actually is many times illegal, or at least a violation of security policy, which will get you sent into jail if I try to aggregate that data. That's a problem that we need to solve. How do you solve it? So a few ways. The siloing and hoarding, I think, can be solved through events like hackathons, which basically spotlight programs that are sharing and enable those programs that are sharing to work with other programs that share. By doing so, those programs get more success, which means they get more money. Those that don't share are not part of the solution, and therefore are less likely to obtain the same type of support from Congress. Number two, you fix policy. So the policy problem is, as I noted, classification. You can fix the policies by ultimately finding contradictions and using software. Some of the stuff I'm working on does this. We're seeking to actually automatically determine contradictions in security classification guide policy, look for gaps in those security classification guides to identify what data can be joined and at what level it gets joined to. And then you can effectively, if you can do that, you can produce automatic classification, which is the ability to go from the policy directly to the application of the classification, the label of the classification, to the individual data and its aggregate. If we can do this, then we can solve the classification problem. So those are the two ways we're focused on basically solving that data story problem. Third opportunity would be to incentivize collaboration across the DoD. This is broader than just data, but data is a part of this. When I was a software developer at Microsoft, I was basically evaluated on three criteria: my individual contributions, how my individual contributions were leveraged by others, and how others leveraged my individual contributions. Whereas at the Department of Defense, there's only one person who writes my review. That review is based on my individual contributions or contributions to that specific organization. In short, we're not incentivized to collaborate. I don't get credit for producing capability for somebody else's organization, but that still is capability that's produced for the Department of Defense. So I think that potentially, if there was a way to encourage or incentivize collaboration among the force, probably people would collaborate more, right? Perhaps we would be incentivized to, share data, build capabilities together, share credit. These are things that normally take place in industry, or at least at companies I worked with, but I see them far less here, and I see the incentives being very small here. And I think that needs to change. I'd like to help change that. I hope there are opportunities to do so within the department.
And lastly, Stuart, you've said before that you, like many other Defense Department leaders, have studied and prepared for a type of war that we're no longer fighting. If you could go back in time, what advice would you give yourself as you were just starting your career in the federal government?
What advice would I give myself? So it's true that if you're focused on a service in national security or in federal government, you're necessarily going to look at what's happening currently, and you're probably going to try to draw a trend line of some kind, right? And look where it's going and try to prepare for that. Sometimes it zags, okay? Sometimes that line doesn't go the direction you expect. Do I regret preparing or studying those things? No, I don't. because knowing those things, number one, gives me a shared background and commonality among my colleagues, right? Number two, the history of an organization is important to understand. And so there's benefits to that as well. What advice would I give for others seeking employment in federal government? I would say to have a build first mentality. Uncommonly in the federal government, and I think it's a nature of the federal government just because of our budget. Many people I work with basically buy their way out of problems, and I don't have a problem with that. That can be a very efficient use of resources if it's cheaper to buy than to build. But as a consequence, that leaves all the problems that you can't buy your way out of hanging around for a while, because a lot of the people, their first effort or the first intuition is to just buy. Classification is one of those problems where we can't buy our way out of it. Policy, a form of classification, of which classification is a form of policy, again, is a problem. If there are problems existing in policy, you cannot buy your way out of it. I cannot hire a contractor to fix my policy. And so these types of problems allow potential, young, say, early federal employees or people aspiring to become federal employees. If you can build a solution to a problem without needing to pay for it, you have a special set of skills that would be really valuable here, right? Because not that many people. That's not the primary effort in government. So if you have that capability, that's special. Number two would be the ability to publicly speak, of which I'm not that great at. I think I'm still getting better. But I think the ability to speak publicly and communicate a message is really important. And I've seen those around me get promoted because of their ability to communicate. So hopefully those are two kind of thoughts that might help someone who's interested in participating in federal government.
Well, Stuart, thank you so much for joining me today and for your insights. And thank you for all the work you do at the Air Force.
Hey, thanks for having me.